There's the single understanding
Exactly.
that we share our being with everyone and everything must be the foundation of any truly civilized culture. It must be at the origin of a civilized culture. If we want some measure of the indication, of some measure of our establishment in our true nature, I'm not sure that looking at a brain scan is the place to look. We should look to the extent to which we are at peace and happy for no reason. That would be a better test. Imperturbable peace,
Yes.
and causeless joy.
Ooh, imperturbable peace and causeless joy. Adore that.
Its ultimate purpose, I would suggest, is that is for the reality to shine unobscured through the illusion. So the illusion being the appearance of multiplicity and diversity, which for most of us conceals its reality. I would suggest that the purpose, if we can speak of purpose, is for that the illusion, the appearance of multiplicity and diversity, not to conceal its reality, but to reveal its reality, to express it, to communicate it, to share it, to celebrate it. In other words, for the appearance to become increasingly transparent to its reality.
I know someone's opinion may contradict yours.
Where's my friend Alan?
It's all about your perspective. Who are we and what is the nature of this reality?
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey everyone, welcome to Simulation. I'm your host, Alan Sakyan. I am super excited and grateful to be featuring Rupert Spira on the show. Hi, Rupert.
Hi, Alan.
Thank you so much for joining us. I have been a big fan of what you've been communicating. And for those that don't know, I'd love to read you Rupert's bio. Rupert Spira is a leading non-dual teacher of the direct path, a synthesis of many global wisdom traditions. His eloquent use of metaphor points people with great efficacy to self-realization. He has authored several books. His YouTube channel is receiving millions of views. He's hosting retreats across the US and Europe, and he's a notable studio potter with work in public and private collections. I'm going to synthesize some of Rupert's key teaching, and then we'll start after that. Over thousands of years, we've been experientially studying consciousness and metaphysics. Only recently, since the scientific revolution, has a global paradigm of materialism become dominant. Industrialization has connected billions of people to electricity and the internet, plus much more. The revelation of quantum mechanics blew our minds, and now the 21st century is knocking. How can science possibly probe the most primal question of our existence? What is consciousness? If you'll join me for a moment in a game, I'd like to ask you to close your eyes and imagine you are in bed, dozing off. You immediately begin dreaming that you're in a kitchen, pouring yourself some tea. You're adoring the high quality of this full immersion where you can literally even smell the aroma. You accidentally spill a little, and suddenly you snap back to laying in your bed with your eyes open. What you just experienced, we predict, is a microcosm reflecting the macrocosm. In other words, the same way we dream a reality and take a first-person perspective is precisely what we are doing with this reality. It's recursive. Reality calls on us to dream for 1/3 of our lives. Quite an obvious hint. One indivisible infinite consciousness in a dream, fully immersed in the high quality, completely forgetting it is a dream. Why we see people running around seeking objects, relationships, substances, anything, is because they want to pierce the veil of separation to feel whole. The irony is you already are what you seek. Rupert, how was that?
That was pretty good, Alan. I can't add much to that.
Okay, excellent. If that's the case, then that makes me happy. I'm always happy, but that makes me especially happy because it's very important to me to take what these diverse leaders like yourself around the world are communicating and be able to try and compress the messages into the most relatable stories, which is basically what you do with your metaphors.
Yeah.
And yes, you've said infinite consciousness is the ultimate dreamer whose activity is the universe.
Yes.
I really like that as well. I want to visualize your lineage quickly. So let's go to your teacher is Francis Lucille, correct? And
Yes.
did you meet him around 1995-ish or when?
A little bit later, 97.
97. Okay.
Yes.
And then for 13 years you studied with him. So up until
Yes.
about 2010 or so.
Yes. Let me just go back a little bit further,
Yes.
Alan, to my late teens, where I first became interested in these matters. And so I started attending a school or a society in London called the Study Society. And it was essentially a school of classical Advaita Vedanta. So for 20 years or so, I was in this classical Advaita teaching, practicing mantra meditation and exploring the classical non-dual teachings. And it was after 20 years of that I then met Francis.
Yes.
He introduced me to the direct approach, and he also introduced me to the tantric approach, which he had learned through his teacher Jean Klein.
Yes.
And as
yes.
you say, I then spent 13 years or so with Francis before I started speaking about these matters myself. Yes.
Yes. Very few people have the opportunity to be introduced to non-duality at the age of 16, which is what you had.
That's true. I was fortunate. My mother and stepfather at the time were both very interested in these matters. They originally went to College House, the Study Society in London, and so they introduced me to College House, the Advaita teaching. They also practiced the Mevlevi turning. And so I was introduced. I was very fortunate at an early age, during my mid to late teens, to come across this understanding, to meet a lot of people and spend really most of my time with a lot of people, most of them older than me at that time, who were interested in these matters. So this really, from my mid-teens up until my mid-30s, the classical Advaita or non-dual approach was really the backdrop to my life and was really the main focus of my life during those years.
And Francis's lineage goes to Jean Klein, who he met in 1975, and then Jean Klein was with Pandit Ji Rao in 1950, and Pandit Ji was a professor of Sanskrit in Bangalore, and he came from a lineage of Advaita teachers.
Yes, that's true. Jean Klein was also a yoga teacher. So what was unusual about Jean Klein, and I think immensely valuable, is that his approach incorporated the body and didn't reject the body and indeed the world, as some of the classical Advaita teachings coming out of India did. So this is what I referred to earlier as the tantric approach, which is an approach of inclusion, including the totality of experience, rather than the classical Advaita approach, where the body and the world are considered, at least in some expressions of it, are considered dangerous realms where we might lose ourselves. So that was something very valuable, immensely valuable, that Francis introduced me to, this inclusive path.
Yes.
as opposed to the path of exclusion or the path of discrimination, which don't get me wrong, I have the highest regard for, and spent 20 years on that path myself, and it was immensely valuable. But there was something incomplete about it for me because of this lack of inclusion of the body and the world. And of course, during these early years, I was practicing, as you said earlier, as a potter. I was spending my days making pots in my studio and my nights reading Ramana Maharshi. But as a potter, I loved things. I spent my life making things. I loved things. I loved beauty. And so there was no question of me renouncing objects. So it wasn't until I met Francis that my love of beauty that I was exploring in my studio by day, and my love of truth that I was exploring at home by night really came together. And I realized that really the love of beauty and the love of truth are indeed the same. The same.
Yes. Yes. And this is key, and we're going to touch on this throughout our conversation, is this full embrace of the beauty of what we have here, and the full unleashing of inner potential artistry gifts into our reality. I want to relate what you just said also to Sri Aurobindo quickly, and the Mother Mira Alfasa and the Integral Yoga, in the sense that they also highly emphasize the importance of anchoring the divine, anchoring the full embodiment in every day. And that way, it basically butterfly effects out into everything that we do with our family, our friends, our work, our relationships, everything. And that's the process of the beginnings of a more beautiful and truthful and awakened to the true nature of reality world.
Yes.
Now, Rupert, ultimately, the biggest questions lie in the field of metaphysics. What is the ultimate nature of reality? Why is there something rather than nothing? What is the nature of consciousness? And then kind of science and spirituality basically do their best to understand that. That's ultimately what we're here doing, is trying to understand that. And a good way to, you've said this question before, a good way to begin your Atma Vichara, self-inquiry, is by asking the question, what is my source? Where do I come from? What is the genesis of all of this? What is my real nature? And you had a really good conversation with Sam Harris as well, because I think it was a good way to juxtapose the consciousness only with someone that is also interested in spirituality, but also has a grounding in deep science and materialism. And so he kind of said in return that there's a big temptation to make consciousness the very first principle. And that he then said that would mean that consciousness then subsumes cosmogony, the Big Bang, and the reasons for that. But then you counter with the question, what is it that knows or is aware of your experience?
Yeah, well, I think there's good reason for making consciousness the first principle, simply because it is the first principle of our experience. So why not start there? It's just an undeniable fact of experience that consciousness, that all that is or could ever be known is experience. And consciousness is the fundamental and primary prerequisite of all experience. So if we want to build a model of reality, why not start there? It is the primary element of our experience. So isn't that scientific, just to start with something that is actually experienced, something that is real in experience, rather than starting with an abstract idea, namely the existence of something called matter outside and independent of consciousness, which nobody has ever found or could ever find or will ever find, because all it is ever possible to find is the content of consciousness. That to me is abstract. What to me is really realistic and scientific is to investigate experience, ask ourselves, what is the primary element of experience? It is obviously consciousness, and to build our model of reality based on that, rather than on something that is abstract.
Okay, so the take is that the ground or the most fundamental first principle is experience, and then that is consciousness, that is awareness, and then that is the nature of reality. Is consciousness, is awareness, and not that there is a big bang that happens 13.8 billion years ago, and after the billions of years of evolution of matter, then the complexity of body activity creates a consciousness that is there a point of any synthesis there, or
that model of sorry to
yeah,
interrupt you, that model of reality is based on the evidence of thought and perception. It presumes that what we perceive of the outside world is real in the way that it is presented to our senses, and that thought's interpretation of sense perception is correct. And extrapolated from this model of reality, we go all the way back to the Big Bang. But this idea is based on the presumption that perception and its interpretation through thought is correct.
Okay.
But it might not be. Maybe our senses don't.
Yeah.
Maybe a combination of perception and conception, that is the finite mind, maybe they don't give us an accurate model of reality. Maybe reality is filtered through sense perception and appears in accordance with its limitations. In other words, the limitations that we see, that we believe pertain to reality, may simply be the limitations of the perceiving apparatus, the finite mind, through which we perceive. We cannot be sure that the limitations that belong to our perceiving apparatus actually pertain to reality itself. How do we know that we are not simply seeing an objectification or a reification of the limitations of our own mind?
Yes.
And after all, when the activities of thought and perception subside, as they do in deep sleep, time and space also subside. When thought and perception begins again, when thought begins again, time seems to begin. When perception begins again, space seems to begin. And this happens every single time thought and perception disappear. Objective experience disappears. Every time it arises again, objective experience arises again. Is that a coincidence? Could there be a connection between the two? I would suggest that there is.
And these are those hints that we were mentioning earlier, these most simple hints. In science, there's Occam's razor. The most simplest is likely correct. And in this case, it's so, in a sense, simple, and it's so much like a hint.
Absolutely. I liked your analogy, your summary at the beginning about the dream. We're given numerous hints as to the nature of reality. And if, as you say, we use Occam's razor, Occam said that of two competing theories, we should always choose the one that makes the least assumptions. So here we have two models of reality. One, that all reality appears within consciousness and is the activity of consciousness. That doesn't make an assumption, it is actually our experience. The second assumption is that what we know of reality is generated by something outside consciousness, namely matter, and indeed gives rise to consciousness. In other words, this second theory suggests that that which is never experienced, namely matter, independent of consciousness, gives rise to that which is alone experienced, namely consciousness. So this makes an enormous assumption, the assumption of the existence of something outside consciousness. Well, if it was necessary to appeal to the existence of something called matter in order to explain our experience, then it would be legitimate under Occam's razor to refer to such a substance. But it is quite possible to make sense of our entire experience of reality, referring only to consciousness in the way that you suggested with the dream analogy. And this consciousness only model also not only enables us to make sense of our experience of reality, but enables us to make sense of many phenomena that the matter model is not able to explain. So the consciousness only model has far greater explanatory power than the matter model.
If we were to visualize the Ouroboros, the snake's head eating its tail, if we were to envision the wholeness of that, then the infinite consciousness is then present at it's present everywhere, but it's present at the Godhead and the tail, in the sense that the tail portion, this model of science that currently is, that many of us agree to and in consensus enjoy the benefits of, is at the tail point. Infinite consciousness is at the tail point, and the Big Bang is the process of the tail point itself, still evolving over time into what we have. So there is still that process, and it's going towards the telos of a Godhead, of the continuation. Is that approximately how do you resonate with that?
I think the model of the Big Bang is a model that is accurate, or reasonably accurate, within the parameters of sense perception and thought. It is an interpretation of reality within the limits of perception and conception, and it is as such a reasonable interpretation, and is a useful interpretation. I'm not suggesting that I love science. I have numerous scientist friends. I have great respect for what they do. It's a valid interpretation and can be
hydrocarbons have literally made us what we are, really.
Yes. So it's a valid relative model of reality that is useful, has numerous useful applications, but it is not an accurate model of reality. And there are no accurate models of reality. Even the consciousness only model that I am suggesting falls short. That there are no accurate models.
Interesting. And that's the idea of the elusiveness of the mystery and the beauty of that, and to continue openly and blissfully in complete honor of that mystery, while simultaneously being interested in the models, in making and playing with models that can help us live better lives.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, let's go into identity. This is very important because in Sanskrit, the word amkara is very interesting, the ego or egoism. And so the idea is that, do you identify with the ego? Do you identify with the limited, finite self in this body and nothing else? Or do you identify yourself as universal, as transcendent? And there's a huge difference between those. And also, we can call something like an awakenings or enlightenment, or the process, whether it be gradually or suddenly, to feeling universal and transcendent, the process that we all are aiming to pierce that veil. And science does, I would like to hear your take on this. Science does a very interesting job at revealing the unity and the interconnectedness. And I would love to see more spiritualists embody some of these scientific understandings of unity, because I think that would help with the synthesis, but also scientists themselves, like in 1945, if they were more spiritually awake, they wouldn't have dropped bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So there's that other side as well. Scientists can also gain a decent amount of spiritual knowledge. The general idea is this: you cannot, and science has proven this, you take 20,000 breaths of air every single day. You can't live without oxygen. But you can't take one of those 20,000 breaths without summoning the photosynthesis that is happening from phytoplankton and trees around the planet. So you are deeply interconnected with the oxygen cycle of the planet with photosynthesis. And so a question is something to ask oneself is, where do I draw a line, or like a boundary? When do I say that I am not the phytoplankton in the trees that provide me with oxygen? All of these, the approximation is 25 sextillion, which is 10 with 21 zeros after it, oxygen molecules that I am inhaling every breath. And then those are oxygenating my body. Where do I draw the line? I have 1,000, we all each have 1,000 species of bacteria in our gut microbiome. So do you affiliate yourself with the 1,000 species of gut bacteria and how they have 2 million total genes versus you have 20,000 genes? So 100 times more genetic expression happening from those gut microbiome. Another example is, when do you take, if you take the apple or the banana, and when does the apple or banana become you? When you bite it and you begin chewing it, when it actually becomes digested and you go through the process of cellular respiration, and the adenosine triphosphate powers you and energizes you. So these are the things that science literally proves interconnectedness and unity. And I'm curious, what do you think about the scientific angle and how it can help the spiritual angle of non-duality flourish?
So, Alan, you've just demonstrated from a physical point of view that we as individual people, or we as a body, are intimately connected with the universe. In fact, not even intimately connected. We are not even apart from the universe as an independently existing entity, either to be connected with it or not connected with it. That there is no clear distinction, even from a physical point of view, which is the point of view you've just demonstrated, and which, as you say, quite rightly, science makes very clear. It is an arbitrary line. But the non-dual understanding goes much further than this. It doesn't presume, to begin with, that what we essentially are is a body, whether or not we are intimately connected to the universe. The non-dual understanding first, the non-dual approach makes this deep investigation into what we essentially are. Most of us, most people believe and feel that what they essentially are is a body which has generated consciousness inside it, in particular inside the brain, and that the body as such, that consciousness as such is born or appears when the body appears, that it evolves as the body evolves, and that it dies or disappears when the body disappears. In other words, the consciousness shares the limits and the destiny of the body. This is the standard approach in our culture. And even from this approach, what you have just demonstrated, the interconnectedness of us, this apparent body, is absolutely true. The non-dual approach, as I said, goes much deeper. It first of all investigates what we essentially are. And in this investigation, we trace back our experience of ourselves, discarding everything that is not essential to us. Our thoughts are obviously not essential to us. They are always appearing and disappearing. Our feelings, likewise, sensations, perceptions, activities, relationships. These are all elements of experience that are added to us. They remain for a while and then they leave us. But what is the us? What is the essential, irreducible element of ourself? And if we undergo this experiment, and it's a very simple experiment, anybody can do it, we end up with just our simple being, our simple self-aware being. It's like undressing at night. When we go to bed at night, we take off all the layers of clothes. Each layer is, of course, superfluous to us. The clothes are changing all the time. And we get to our naked bodies, that element of ourself, relatively speaking, that cannot be removed. That is our naked being. Well, if we do the same thing relative to our experience, and we take off, so to speak, our thoughts, feelings, memories, sensations, perceptions, activities, and relationships, we end up with pure awareness. And this is a pure self-aware being. So this is the first great discovery.
And that's what we share, is that.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that the first step is the discovery, I am awareness. This is not yet what is referred to as enlightenment or awakening in the traditions. The next step is to investigate the nature of the awareness.
So to review, so we took off all of the layers of identity, and then we got to the most primal, most first principled, which was the awareness. Yes,
we took off everything that we were identified with, everything that we thought was essential to us, thoughts, feelings, etc. And we got back to our naked identity, our original face, as they say in the Zen tradition, the essential nature of the mind, as they say in Buddhism, the self, as they say in the Hindu tradition. So that's the first discovery. What I essentially am is simply the fact of being aware, or awareness itself. The next discovery is to discover the nature of the awareness that I am, the discovery that it is ever present, that it has no limits, and that its nature is inherently peaceful and unconditionally fulfilled. And that this is the recognition that is traditionally referred to as enlightenment. So I would say this was the second recognition. Happiness is my nature.
Yes.
The third great recognition. That
meditation is not something that we do, it's what we are. We are the happiness, the bliss, the infinity.
Yes, the essential nature of the awareness that I am is peace or happiness.
Yes, okay.
And then the third, we can come back. I'm just...
Yes.
The third great recognition, which you hinted at, the recognition that the being that we essentially are is shared by not only everyone, but everything. In other words, everyone and everything derive their apparently independent existence from a single, infinite, and indivisible reality or whole, whose nature is, well, ultimately it is unnameable, because all names have evolved to describe the content of experience. But if we are going to speak about these matters, let's give it a provisional name. In these circles, we tend to speak of it as consciousness or awareness. In religious circles, it is referred to as God's presence or Brahman. But in common parlance, it is referred to as I, myself, my being, the one infinite and indivisible reality, which doesn't connect us all, because in the ultimate analysis, there is no all. There is not a multiplicity and diversity of objects and selves, each with their own independent existence, to be connected. In the ultimate analysis, there are no independently existing objects or self. There is simply a single, infinite, indivisible whole, which is refracted through the prism of the finite mind and appears as many things and many people. So as a concession to the belief that there are many things and many people, we can say that we all share our reality. But in the if we really want to try to be more accurate, in the ultimate reality, that there is no we. There are no separate objects or selves, either to be united or not to be united. There is simply the unity of being that appears as this multiplicity and diversity. And the recognition, we are speaking of this in intellectual terms and analyzing it with the use of our rational mind. But the recognition that we share our being is a familiar recognition that millions of people, I would suggest that everybody, has some taste of, and that is the experience of love. Love is the recognition that we share our being.
Yeah. There's several things there. There's you mentioned the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. There's also Wahat al-Wujud, which is that the unity of all being, the unity of all existence. So it's also interesting. It's such a perennial wisdom. It's literally across all of these ancient spiritual traditions across the planet.
Of course it is, because it's what's true. Because it's what's real. Anyone at any time, irrespective of their location on the earth, the time in which they have been built, anyone that goes to the nature of reality, by definition, goes to the same reality, because reality is always the same thing, which is not a thing. So, of course, all these diverse expressions of truth or reality are going to point to in their own unique ways, are going to point ultimately to the same reality, because reality is always real. It is always the same. Reality is not one thing in India and another thing in America. It's not one thing in 2,000 years ago and another thing today. Reality is, and in 2,000 years' time, reality will be exactly what it is now. Although if human beings still exist, then they will express it in very, very different ways. The language we're speaking will seem so archaic to them. And we cannot imagine what that language will be.
Yeah, and in the way that science also aims to approach this and validate this is through this unbroken chain of evolution to that source point. And even the way of perceiving it that way, and all of these other ways in terms of trying to pierce the veil of where is this boundary, and at least the slow process of getting beyond the veil of the ego to the universal, to the transcendent, to the unity of all existence, is there's so many of these different ways up this mountain to that nature of reality. But like you say, at that pinnacle point, at that nature of reality, the ultimate point is that infinite consciousness. And I think this is a very interesting way to put it, is there is this ultimate point. So this kind of leads me into the next point, which is I would love to talk to you about this analogy of the symphony. And the reason why I'd like to talk to you about this analogy is because the unity of all being is the symphony. Infinite consciousness is the symphony. It is the seemingly, or the illusory, which is that it's the way that it appears is has it can lead people off from the truth. So it's not as it appears. That the symphony has a good analogy in the sense that, and I want to hear what you think about this. There's the unity of all being, but then there is this, again, this illusory, the self, this Alan and Rupert and all of these 8 billion seemingly individuals. But part of the beauty of the symphony analogy is that people don't reside in the ultimate, which is, okay, non-duality. Excellent. And rather it's both the unity, it's non-duality. Excellent. And it's also, I get the opportunity to be we get to be artists, right? We get to make great studio pottery, right? We get to make great content. We get to engineer, we get to design, we get to tinker, but we do that all from the place of unity. We do that all from the place of non-duality. Is that about right? How does that resonate?
Yes. Ultimately, everything, absolutely everything comes from or is an expression or modulation of consciousness or awareness. I use the words synonymously. Some of our thoughts and feelings and our subsequent activities and relationships are mediated through the belief, I am a temporary, finite, separate self. So even though those thoughts and feelings and the activities and relationships that they generate ultimately come from consciousness, they do not express what is true of the nature of consciousness or reality. Why? Because they are filtered through the belief in separation and therefore express that belief. Ultimately, of course, they still come from the same place that everything comes from. So I would suggest that true creativity is any could be said to be any form, be that form in words, in music, in any art form, is a form that comes unmediated, directly from our deepest reality or being, that is not filtered through the sense of separation, although it requires the agency of the person to articulate that expression. The source of that expression doesn't come from a person, the feeling of being temporary, finite, separate. It is an expression of the reality that lies behind, so to speak, the finite mind or the separate person, and
which is why the artist calls themselves a channel so often.
Yes, and the purpose of this art that is informed by the background of awareness is to bring the truth or the reality that is inherent in it out into the world in order to be shared with humanity.
Yes. And that this is the idea that I may be a violinist, but you may be a saxophone player, and there's also a drummer, and there's a cellist, and there's the clarinet, and that's the idea of, and they're all, and by the way, 2 clarinets are maybe playing different harmonies, and so there's that as well. So that's the idea that all 8 billion are, in that sense, artists in the symphony, and that they have they have a unique expression.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Can I can I upgrade your metaphor?
Please upgrade it. Yes.
Because your metaphor is it's a beautiful metaphor, and it's true. I can see what you're trying to articulate. But the first metaphor that you referred to, the metaphor of the dream, has I think is more efficient and is clearer. So can I, if you want, we can go back to the symphony. But can I re-articulate what you're saying in terms of the dream metaphor, because I think it's easier to speak about and much easier to understand. So as you said in your introduction, take what happens to us when we have a dream at night. Where are you located now, Alan? Where do you live?
In South Dakota right now.
You're in Dakota. Okay, so say you fall asleep in South Dakota and you imagine that you're walking on the streets of London. You don't view the dreamed streets of London directly from your mind asleep in South Dakota. Your mind has forgotten that it is dreaming. It has overlooked itself, and your own mind has located itself within its own dream. You now seem to be Alan walking on the streets of London. That is the only way your mind can perceive the dream, by overlooking itself, locating itself in the dream, and viewing what is in fact its own activity from this localized perspective in the dream as the streets of London. Now, everybody else that you encounter on the streets of London, which from your limited perspective seem to be separate people, are in fact the activity of your own indivisible mind. When you wake up in the morning, you realize the entire dream, all the different people and all the different objects were the activity. There were no entities there. It was all the activity of my own mind. It only appeared as a multiplicity and diversity of objects and selves from the illusory perspective of the self that I seemed to become in the dream. Now, let's say that you meet one of these people, you meet an old friend on the streets of London in your dream. You haven't seen this friend for a long time. You both go to a cafe, you sit down, and you have a conversation about something, and you both disagree. You're talking about American politics, okay, and you completely disagree with your friend. So you have one point of view, your friend has another completely point of view. So your point of view, you each have a series of thoughts. You think that your thoughts are right, you think your friend's thoughts are incorrect, so you can have two completely different thoughts, opposing thoughts that seem to be completely opposite to each other, and are indeed in the dream opposite to each other. But when you wake up, you realize that both the true thoughts and the untrue thoughts were generated in your own mind. And that goes for the pleasant sensations, the unpleasant sensations, the kind thoughts, the unkind thoughts, the loving feelings, the unloving feelings, the behavior that is intelligent and loving, the behavior that is cruel and unjust. It all ultimately is the activity of a single universal mind.
Yes. And so in the analogy, the idea then is that infinite consciousness has in the symphony has all the artists, in all the seemingly individual artists have we have a filter, the filter of the mind in the dream, that then there's a process of realizing for the seemingly finite minds to realize that the infinite consciousness, and it's both the infinite consciousness, and it is also that it's not okay, but it's And so it's the realization and it's the creation from that place of realization.
Yes,
So the clarinet player, the violinist, etc., they create their melody harmony from that place of aha. And
yes,
yes,
exactly.
yes.
Exactly. Let's keep both metaphors alive. So let's take, there are essentially two possibilities. Let's go back. I'm going to translate what you've now said into the dream metaphor. You're back on the
And
streets.
by the way, Rupert, I just want to say, I think this is so powerful for the synthesis of East and West, because the East is very on the non-dual and the West is very on the individual, and which is very interesting because then it can synthesize them into that harmony. Go ahead. Yeah.
So let's go back to the dream analogy. You meet your friend. So you are the dreamed character. Let's continue to call you Alan. And your friend, he's called, let's say he's called David. So Alan and David are talking in the cafe. So let's say that Alan has recognized that the essential nature of his mind, the essential nature of himself, is shared with everyone and everything. Although Alan still perceives from the localized perspective of his body. He can only see the streets of London from where he's sitting on his cafe table. But he knows that the nature of that which perceives in him is not limited to, located in, or generated by his body. So he knows that although he seems to be a separate individual, what he essentially is shared by everyone and everything. And his thoughts and feelings and his subsequent activities and relationships are informed by this understanding. Now, David does not realize this. Alan's friend David believes, Alan's friend David reasons with himself, well, every time I close my eyes, the world disappears. Every time I open my eyes, the world, or the streets of London in this case, they reappear. So it's perfectly obvious that whatever it is that perceives the world must live just behind my eyes in my brain, and was obviously generated by my brain. It is limited to my brain, and when my brain dies, my consciousness will die with it. In other words, David believes that he is a temporary, finite self that is separate from, albeit related to, everyone and everything else. And all his thoughts and feelings, or almost all his thoughts and feelings, and his subsequent activities and relationships are informed by that understanding. So Alan and David have very different kinds of thoughts.
They're different instrument players in that sense as well. If one player is playing only...
They are different instruments, but what's more important is that the understanding that is expressed through the instrumentality of each of their bodies and minds is a different understanding, although ultimately it is all the activity of Alan asleep in South Dakota. Nevertheless, in one case, in the case of Alan in the dream, his thoughts and feelings express the reality, and in David's case, they do not express that. They express separation. And as a result of the belief in separation, David is able to not only think and feel, but act and relate in ways that are not consistent with truth, love, beauty, justice. And to extrapolate now from David, if you were to take David's point of view, in extreme cases, one whose thoughts and feelings and subsequent activities and relationships are informed by this sense of separation is able to commit acts of gross unkindness and injustice. They are still the activities of the same infinite mind, but filtered through the sense of separation. They are able to behave in a way that is not consistent with reality. Whereas what Alan in the dream does, everything he says, he is an artist, and the purpose of his art is to express his understanding and communicate it and share it. just
Yes.
as that is the case for
This,
Alan in real life as well. Okay, back to the symphony.
it's so, this is playing so beautifully. So the the ultimate dreamer of infinite consciousness dreams up the the illusory universe, in the sense that it doesn't seem to be exact what it is,
Yeah,
but
can
yeah,
I hold that thought just for a minute,
yeah,
Alan?
go ahead,
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
I don't like to interrupt, but I wanted to say this the last time you
Yes,
mentioned
please.
about the illusory world, because I think this is very important. It's
Yes.
something that I misunderstood for years. And I think it's something that causes a lot of people who would otherwise be interested in these matters trouble, and for
Yes,
good
yes,
reason, with
yes.
this approach. And that is because the world is referred to as being an illusion. And for many people, the idea that something is an illusion is tantamount to saying that it is not real.
Yeah.
So I want to make a very clear distinction between something that is not real and something that is an illusion.
Illusion. Yes. Yes.
So let's just I want to use an example. A square circle. Try to imagine now a square circle.
Or in the Zen tradition, the one hand clapping.
Okay, but let's stick with the square. Try to imagine now a square circle. We can't do it. In other words, it's not even possible to imagine the illusory image of a square circle. A square circle is not an illusion. It is utterly non-existent.
Yeah.
However, when we are watching a movie, for instance, and we see a landscape in the movie, the landscape is obviously an illusion, but it is not non-existence. There is something that is there. There is a reality to the illusory landscape. And of course, when we go up to it, we touch the landscape, we find, relatively speaking, that its reality is the screen. Now,
yes.
all of this, the world, as you rightly say, in this perspective, the world is an illusion, not in the sense that it is not real. It is absolutely real, in the sense that the world is an illusion, in the sense that it is not what it appears to be. It appears to be a multiplicity and diversity of objects and selves, only from the limited and localized perspective of a separate self or a finite mind.
Yes, yes. This is going to play beautifully into.
Okay, so I'm sorry.
Yes, that was very important.
Go back to your thought about the illusory world.
That was very important, Rupert. Thank you. So the ultimate dreamer of the infinite consciousness, we have this dreams, the illusory, which is, it's not what it appears to be, symphony. And then here's where I'm really interested in this symphony. The symphony has these 8 billion seemingly, again, illusory in the sense, artists that are individual, that are being filtered through the finite mind. And but here's something interesting. My understanding of infinite consciousness, I think it was Atmananda Krishna Menon who said that if you do have to think of it in a sense, you can think of it as behind you, the infinite consciousness, and that the more that you go through the process of self-abidance, so you go through Atma-vichara, self-inquiry, to gain the realization of infinite consciousness, and then you have the process of self-abidance. So the idea is that you have potentially varying degrees of artistry, in the sense that there are people that have deep self-abidance in infinite consciousness. So when they're playing their violin, they're doing it in the acronym STO, service to other. So they're playing their violin with service to other, because they've realized that. Versus maybe a clarinet player who, in the case of David in your dream, remember, so this is where we can connect the two analogies. David, in the case of the dream, hasn't went through the deeper self-inquiry and self-abidance process. And so he is under more of the acronym of S, service to self. So he is playing the clarinet, but that's why he's also going through the process of seeking objects, relationships, substances, all these external things to make himself happy and peaceful. So how is that? I feel like we're getting closer to an interesting synthesis between in the dream and the symphony. Is it?
Okay, so
And do you see this spectrum also in terms of the 8 billion? And do you see them evolving as well, in the sense that someone that is service to self, inevitably, Rupert, we had slavery and we don't have slavery anymore in much of the world. And so there is a sort of ethical or consciousness or awareness, not in a sense that consciousness or the awareness is evolving, but our ethics and our morals and our philosophies are evolving to be more towards service to other and more towards the unity, towards that truth of the infinite consciousness. Yeah.
Yes. So, an ethical code would be a code that laid down a series of behaviors that are expressive of truth or reality, that show people how to behave in line with, or in a way that is consistent with, the fact that everyone shares their being, that all ethics can be boiled down to that single fact. Ethical behavior is behavior that is consistent with the fact that we all share our being. This is why St. Augustine, when asked about these matters, ethics and morals, he simply said, love and do whatever you want. He meant simply realize that you are one with everything and everyone, and as long as your behavior is consistent with that understanding, you don't need any moral code, that everything you do will be consistent with that understanding. The reason why we need 10 commandments or a moral code is for those of us that do not yet feel this. We are told how to behave in a way that is consistent with this understanding until we realize it for ourselves. So let's go back to David and the symphony. So the violinist is, you say in your analogy, the violinist is one who is aware of that she shares her reality with everyone. And the clarinetist does not yet realize this. He still believes and feels that he is a temporary finite self. However, I would suggest that many artists and many musicians, when they are in their studios or when they are performing in their quartets or their bands or their orchestras, that they are, at least for the duration, for the period of time in which they are performing their art, they transcend their limitations as a person, and they perform in a way that is expressive of truth or reality. When they then go back to their everyday lives, they revert to believing and feeling that they are a separate self or an ego. But many people, and in fact, this is why for many artists, their art is a kind of, it's not a compulsion. It's something that they can't not do, that they know that when they are in their studios or performing in their orchestras or band, they are in touch with something that they know is so utterly alive and true. And in that moment, they do transcend the sense of separation. They are expressing the truth, reality, love. So it's not black and white. It's not either you've recognized yourself, your true nature, and everything you do expresses that, or you haven't yet. There is a spectrum.
Yes. Beautiful. Yes.
And that is not
yeah.
only true. Sorry, it's not only true of artists. It's true of everybody.
Yes, exactly. In that sense, all 8 billion are artists in that sense.
Yes,
Yeah.
everybody, all 8 billion of us know the experience of love. In other words, everybody has tasted the fact that we share our being, and everybody has had the experience of behaving and relating in a way that is consistent with that understanding. For most people, it's only that behavior is only directed towards a few people in their circle, their friends or their family.
Yes.
But nevertheless, they've still understood and felt what it is to share our being, even if that is not their consistent experience.
And Rupert, would you say that we are, over the last several thousand years, if not tens of thousands of years, that we have been going more and more towards the general the full embodied realization, more and
So.
more of that?
I hope so, Alan.
Okay.
I hope so.
Because that's the general idea of what it, like in evolution,
Yes.
when people say that word, that's
Yes.
yeah.
I tend to be optimistic. Everything ultimately is destined to return to its source. There is nowhere else for it to return to. So ultimately, everything is destined for its source.
Yeah.
One could argue that there is more violence, more disharmony, more conflict in the world today. I would suggest that the old structures were that in our society were egoic structures. They were structures in our corporations, in our governments, in our institutions. That they were structures that were based upon an egoic sense of self,
more tyrannical,
a separate self, and that expresses itself in extremes, in tyrannical dictatorships, but also in much smaller ways, in families, in companies, in communities, and the sense of separation can express itself. So I would suggest that the chaos we see in our society today, and the violence, the conflict, I hope, and I believe that it is the evidence that these structures are falling apart because they're not based in truth or reality. And although we're witnessing a time of great upheaval, I hope that and I believe that it makes for the possibility that a new order will emerge, one that is based on our shared being. This must be that there's the single understanding that we share our being with everyone and everything must be the foundation of any truly civilized culture. It must be at the origin of a civilized culture.
I love that. That first principle of recognition of shared being.
It's the principle that it should be the fundamental principle of all, but not only of all of us, but because we're speaking of the world, of all politicians.
Yes, exactly.
All politics should be in the service of one idea or one understanding alone, namely everyone and everything. When I say everything, I include everything because I'm not just talking about animals and people. I'm talking about the earth, our environment, that everyone and everything share their being. That should be the single guiding principle of all people in general, but politicians in general. That their policies, their individual policies, then in relation to different situations and events, would be the means by which this understanding was then expressed and shared and communicated and implicated in society.
Yes, we have been very obsessed about taking that recognition of shared being and having it deeply embodied at Davos at the World Economic Forum, in the Global 500 top companies, all the presidents and congresses of the world, in Hollywood, in Silicon Valley, all of these places, especially in people that have so much guiding influence, are the most important, especially to have that recognition of shared being be that first principle. And when it becomes the first principle, Rupert, it also enables the recognition that my clarinet or violin or saxophone or drums or bass or whatever I'm doing, it must be for the service to other. It must be for augmenting the social fabric, for enabling the basic needs on like a Maslow's hierarchy to be met, so that if air, water, food, energy, education, healthcare, etc., are met, it enables people to have a deeper self-abidance. It enables the inquiry into the true nature of reality, plus it enables them to become an artist in symphony as well. And so that's sort of the general process that at least I see happening.
One who is one who not only understands but feel that they share their being with everyone and everything. They play in tune in the symphony. And one who does not feel this plays out of tune.
Out of tune, trying to hoard materialistic possessions and that type of stuff, that versus playing in tune. I like that. I like that as well. That's so excellent. Wow. Yeah. Time has flown. Do you believe in our ability to leverage science, in the sense that there's all of these new technological methodologies that exist, including fMRI, EEG, EKG, the samples of the microbiome? Do you believe in our ability to have a biometric correlate to a non-dual state of awareness?
What would a biometric
correlate look like? Yes. Yeah. So it would be something like for example, with brain, it would be like a connectome harmonic. And so that would be like the total of all of your chemoelectroconnectomics are in a harmonic state of resonance. Maybe with your heart, it would be that you have a higher heart rate variability versus a lower heart rate variability for something that's more stressed in that sense. So there are these biomarkers for cortisol, or there are these biomarkers for more blissful or meditative or peaceful states of consciousness, states of awareness. So do you see science potentially helping with a biometric correlate of more awakened, aware, enlightened states of being?
Science may discover correlates that indicate one's state of mind. But whether they will help, whether those discoveries will actually help in the recognition we're speaking of, I'm not so sure. If
you were so optimistic earlier, Rupert.
No, I am very optimistic. I just don't feel that these correlates that scientists may or may not find in the brain are helpful, either as indicators or, more importantly, as means to the recognition of our true nature. If we want some measure of the indication, of some measure of our establishment in our true nature, I'm not sure that looking at a brain scan is the place to look. We should look to the extent to which we are at peace and happy for no reason. That would be a better test. Imperturbable peace
Yes.
and causeless joy.
Ooh, imperturbable peace and causeless joy. Adore that. Yeah. Well, because
And
go ahead.
nor this, to recognize the nature of ourself is so simple, Alan. It's been mystified,
Yeah.
and complexified and obscured, not by the founders of the great religious and spiritual traditions, but by their followers who did not understand or only partially understood their teaching. All that is necessary, to go back to the beginning of our conversation, is this metaphorical undressing, this removing. It's not even necessary to remove our thoughts, feelings, activities, and relationships. All it is, in other words, it's not necessary to change our experience or manipulate it in any way. All that is necessary is to see that element of ourself which cannot be taken away from us, to see that which is essential to us, not our thoughts, not our feelings, sensations, perceptions, activities, relationships. All of these appear and disappear on the screen of awareness. But the awareness is the essential and irreducible nature of ourself. And this is something that is simple. Everyone can recognize it simply by virtue of the fact that everyone is aware. And everyone can simply, it's not, as I said, it's not necessary to reject the content of experience. All that is necessary is to relax the focus of our attention from its content, and just relax back into the fact of being aware, which is the ever-present and inherently peaceful background of all experience. That's all. And to begin with, that this background of awareness, it seems to be a place that we visit from time to time, and then we get lost in the content of experience again. But in time, it ceases, the back and forth between the background of awareness and the foreground of experience ceases, and we begin to be what Krishna Menon called, we begin to be established in our true nature. We cease just to visit from time to time the peace of the background. We live there, we abide there. We still face experience. We still have to deal with our everyday experience. But everything we think and feel, and in time our subsequent activities and relationships, are informed by and are an expression of this background of peace and unconditional joy.
I love that. Always a work in progress, in the sense of always becoming more and more established. And I think that's very important in making it easier for people to feel like it's not a far off thing.
Yes. Not only is it not a far off thing, our being is closer to us than our most intimate and precious feelings. It is not even close to us. It is us.
And getting our entire world on that closer, and hopefully we have been over time getting closer and closer to that, and then being your unique artistry from that is, I think, the general essence of where we got in much of this.
Yes. All of us who are interested in these matters, you and I and all your viewers, and
yours
we
as
all
well,
express our understanding, such as it is, in a way that is unique to us. You know, I do it through speaking and writing. I used to do it in my studio, but there are so many ways.
8 billion.
8 billion ways. Some of them require a lot of form, a lot of content. They involve speaking or writing or all your lovely drawings on the wall behind. Other people may not express this understanding in form. They may just abide, just rest in their being, and they are the ones that communicate this understanding silently.
Yes.
And I'm sure that we all know
Yes.
what it's like to be in the company of someone who is at ease, who is at peace,
Yes.
who does not feel that they lack anything, irrespective of how wealthy or impoverished they may be, how powerful it is to be in the company of such a person, and how when we go home, we feel somehow blessed just by being with them. We may have chatted about the weather or politics or dinner, or we may not have spoken directly about these matters as you and I have done, and such people may never speak directly about these matters, but they communicate this
Yes.
understanding silently, and that their communication, their contribution to humanity is just as valuable as those of us that
Yes.
express this understanding in more formalized ways, like you and
Yes.
I and
Yes.
numerous others.
And as we say in music, what makes music music is the silence between the notes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rupert, one more question. Is that okay? May I?
Yes, of course.
Okay. We're talking about this trajectory of hopefully becoming more and more self-abiding in that and channeling that as artistry through us. What is the telos? What is the purpose for the ultimate dreamer, infinite consciousness, to make the dream? What is the purpose of it? And in terms of trajectory to heading towards some sort of a godhead, what happens? Do we Ouroboros another dream? Is that, yeah? And what's the relationship with artificial intelligence and like virtual realities and simulation theory with that godhead and that continued Ouroboros? Please, Rupert. Yes.
My mother, who first introduced me to these matters in my mid-teens, reminds me quite often that when I was about 7 years old, I said to her, I think that the entire universe is God's dream, and that our part in the dream is to make God's dream as nice a dream as possible. Yes. Well, that was an innocent, naive 7-year-old's way of expressing what we are speaking of now. And I have to confess that I have not evolved very much over the intervening 50 or so years. I still basically feel the same thing, although I express it in somewhat more sophisticated language. But so I still think that the universe is God's dream. I don't often use that language, although I am really a closet Sufi. I tend not to use that language because the word God is so intolerable to so many people for obvious reasons. It has been abused so much. So I tend not to use that language. I consider this to be the activity of an infinite consciousness. As to the purpose of it, to answer your question, I would no longer say that I think its purpose is to be as nice as possible a dream for God to have, so that God doesn't have to have nightmares. Or its ultimate purpose, I would suggest, is that is for the reality to shine unobscured through the illusion. So the illusion being the appearance of multiplicity and diversity, which for most of us conceals its reality. Yeah. I would suggest that the purpose, if we can speak of purpose, is for that the illusion, the appearance of multiplicity and diversity, not to conceal its reality, but to reveal its reality, to express it, to communicate it, to share it, to celebrate it. Yes. In other words, for the appearance to become increasingly transparent to its reality.
Yes. Yes. And I believe beautiful. And I believe Francis Lucille says it's a eternal 4th of July fireworks.
Yes, yeah, he said that once, I think. Yes, yes, yes.
And I like that as the purpose, for the reality to shine through the illusion. Yeah, I like that, and it does seem like there's a titration in a sense, if we can use that more and more towards that remembrance, and and that's, Rupert, there's a lot about artificial intelligence and virtual realities and simulations that I think have a lot to do with the Godhead.
That's for another conversation. Let's not get started on that now.
Okay. All right. Rupert, wow. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Alan, for inviting me. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. I have managed during our conversation not to get distracted by the fascinating drawings on the wall behind you. Fortunately, they're just out of focus, so I can't read them, but they look marvelous. And it's a pleasure to meet you in this way and to have had this conversation. And I hope our paths will cross again, either virtually, if not in person.
Yeah. Likewise, Rupert. Hopefully, all of this is your contributions are present in all of this. All of these brilliant artists that I'm kind of sponging up, and then I'm wringing out the sponge into this art to share with.
Well, I think talking about different characters, Alan, playing different instruments, expressing the same understanding, your background and my background in this conversation, they express our two different characters very nicely.
Yeah.
but both singing the same song, but in very different ways.
Yeah. And Rupert, if you guys, all of the links are in the bio to Rupert's work. Check out Rupert's YouTube channel. It's just exploding. He has a bunch of really great videos on it, unpacking the essence of non-duality. So please do check that out. Also, rupertspira.com, the links in the bio below, has all of his United States and Europe retreats that he hosts. Yes.
Although, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
They're all on hold on the moment. It's all online
for the moment.
At the moment.
At the moment. Yeah.
One day, I hope
it's coming.
We'll be live again. Yes,
it's coming. And I hope. I know you do retreats in the Northern California region where we host our studio show, and so hopefully to meet in person then, and also our show. Given the studio's interest in Los Angeles as well, it's very interesting to potentially have you host you down there for a retreat in that area and help catalyze more people to attend. So, because that's another market. We were talking about Silicon Valley and Hollywood. California is the 5th largest economy in the world, and so to have as a state by itself. So to have you also bring your skills, your stories, your sharing to Los Angeles, to Hollywood, would also be very important. Rupert, wow, so grateful. Thank you.
It was a pleasure, Alan. Thank you for inviting me. Take care, keep well, and until we meet again.
Yes, until we meet again. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We greatly appreciate it. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below on the episode. We would love to hear from you. Get chatting in the comments about all of the different things that Rupert was sharing, about what we were going back and forth on. We would love to hear your thoughts. Again, check out all the links in the bio below to Rupert's work. Do check all of that out. Go follow him across platforms. Share his work if it resonates. Attend his retreats. And also, support the artists, the entrepreneurs, the spiritual leaders. Support the people in your communities around the world that are making impact that you believe in. Support them, help them flourish, and also unleash your own gifts as well. And build that more beautiful future our hearts know is possible. We love you very much. Thank you for tuning in. We will see you soon. Bye, everyone. Peace. Namaste.
Bye, Alan. Bye-bye.
Bye, Rupert. So I think you actually provided me with a very interesting synthesis of the dream with the symphony, in a sense.
It was nice. I liked the way that we went back and forth between the two, and because each one has a certain, each one is good for illustrating a slightly different aspect of the understanding. And I thought it was nice. It was like weaving a blanket out of threads. It worked very nicely.
It was weaving a blanket out of threads. That's what it was. Yeah, yeah. I love it. And now we get to lay in it. And yeah,
And now we get to lay in it. Exactly.
Yeah.